Welcome, Covenant Christians, Mormons, and anyone who stumbles upon this channel who's interested in the restoration and in our little corner of Mormonism, Covenant Christianity. The philosophies of men mingled with scripture. That's kind of a hot topic, and often in that conversation, the notion that psychology or mental health lingo is perhaps a profaning of the sacred, or is it mixing such things? Hot discussion we're going to have today. And to kind of address those issues and to think through these ideas, whether mental health, um, psychology is reconcilable and applicable to covenant Christianity and living the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, we're going to have Wendy offer us her perspective alongside her husband, Peter. Wendy is a licensed therapist, and I believe she works with inmates. She's
Yeah, I work
right
at
in the
the
darkness of things. And Peter and I, we've had a few discussions about psychological principles and how they can be applied to gospel living. And so we're going to get both perspectives today, and then we're going to have a dialogue about this amongst members of our fellowship. So thank you for listening to this, and I hope you enjoy the journey as we work through these ideas. So the floor is now yours, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is my first time using this platform, so I think I just do share and
Correct.
then optimize. Yeah, I just have text and images. And then if I click share, okay, what is it? Does it just share my whatever screen? Oh, Chrome tab. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, it'll share whatever screen you select. So Chrome tab would be if you want to
Okay.
share what's on your Chrome
I
tab.
figured that, but I'm gonna see slideshow. Oh, wait, nope. Oops.
We can see it. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, but that's the I just showed you the final slide. So what I want to show you is the first slide. Well, I don't have to give the presentation now because I showed you already know where I'm going with this. Okay.
All
So
right.
can you see the slideshow?
Yes, we can see it
Okay.
clear.
And I want to see if there's a way for me to see the slideshow and see you all at the same time, but I don't know that that is that not an option?
Usually,
Can
our faces are on a different screen, so you'll see one screen, and if you move around on your desktop, you might be able to pull up the screen that we're on.
Okay. So I love this question. I think this is a really great question, and I really appreciate being invited to talk about these things. And I feel like among us, Stephanie has said a wealth of, given us just a wealth of information in support of psychology. I am an avid listener of her podcast, and there's just a lot to hear on there. And she gets so very granular. And so what I'm going to do is just maybe be a little more big picture here. So I wanted to tell you all my story because it seems relevant to how I came to where I'm at. But back when I was in high school, I discovered psychology. I loved my psych class. It was like my favorite class and wanted to major in it in college because I was so fascinated by human beings. And then I got to college and I was doing my undergrad at BYU. And I found that in my English classes, you could explore the human experience with a lot of there was a lot of breadth and nuance, and there weren't so many limitations on things like there were in my psych classes. My psych classes was a lot about disorders, putting people in boxes. It felt like to me as a 18-year-old, a lot of just like really like rigid boundaries around things was what it felt like at the time. And so even though I was fascinated by people, I ended up becoming an English major in order to fully explore what I wanted to explore. And I actually ended up double majoring in English and linguistics because I love language, but that's a different story. And then when I graduated, I went on and did a master's degree in the same in English. And then I ended up being a stay-at-home mom for like 15 years. And I did odd jobs, freelancing, writing, and editing, but mainly I was just a stay-at-home mom, not just a stay-at-home mom. It's a very important job to be a mother and to be a father. And then I ended up co-authoring a book on compulsive pornography use and getting to, with a marriage and family therapist, and getting to interview people, interviewing couples. And I realized I'm much more of a people person than I ever knew. And I couldn't just sit in front of a computer all day for my career now that my kids were starting to go to school. And so I ended up going back to school. But there was a roadblock along the way, and this is relevant because it was something where I very much felt led on this path, and it was the right thing to do. And so I applied to marriage and family therapy program, a master's program at BYU. And the third time was not a charm. I did not get in. And even though I had 2 other degrees from BYU, and I just felt pretty lost. And then about 6 months later, Peter and I were rebaptized. And later that year, we lost our temple recommends. And we lost our temple recommends. And in hindsight, I realized how difficult that would have been to try to keep an ecclesiastical endorsement, if you all know what that is, at BYU, while actually having undergone this massive faith transition where I no longer fit in the box and could jump through the hoops they were asking me to jump through. And so I just set that aside. But 3 years later, that was when the time was right. And I ended up getting a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from the University of Utah. Expected myself to go into private practice. When everyone would ask me, what do you want to do? I'm like, probably just private practice. That's what there is, right? Never in a million years expected to work in corrections. But when trying to figure out what was the right course for my life, I ended I went to my interview and knew these were my people. And so I ended up as a therapist working with sex offenders, actually, for the Utah Department of Corrections. And I've been doing that for the past 4 years. And lately, I've actually discovered I have a second job where I'm training in DBT, and that it's called dialectical behavioral therapy. And that has been something that has also just been part of the course of my life. And I had we had Claude make me these slides, and some of them don't follow the order, but I'll just follow the order of these slides. Don't follow the order of my argument. So is psychology a philosophy of men, or is it can that there be true wisdom found in psychology? And I would say both of these things can be true. Like, I have seen so psychology is a very broad field that is now centuries old. And there are multiple modalities, multiple philosophies that psychology is based in. And some of them are much more philosophy of men than others. Like, for example, I went to the U. I like to call it my hippy dippy program. I really loved it because a lot of it was very Rogerian psychology, which I actually believe in, because it's based in the humility of seeing a person you are with. It's very non-hierarchical. So the humility of this person that I'm with, I'm no better than this person, and they actually have something in them where they can find the answers themselves, which aligns with my belief in, like, we all have a piece of the divine inside us. We just need to find that. And it was also my program at the U was very based in what's called feminist multicultural therapy. We had a lot of feminist multicultural therapists, so I got pretty well trained in that. And that is based in the idea that marginalized people are oppressed, and that they need to find where they are being oppressed, and um, and be able to rise up, be able to advocate for themselves and overcome this oppression. And I think that this is true for some people. I will tell you that applying that to the population I work with would be very ineffective for helping someone experience true growth, because the people that I work with very often, not universally, but often are quite like, despite the fact that, yeah, there is a lot of suffering in prison, there is also a they also are quite aware and fixated on the oppression that they experience. And actually, it's a risk factor for them when you are focused. Like the evidence, the science we have found about sex offenders is that it's a risk factor when someone is fixated on everything that is wrong in their lives. And so it's actually not effective for me to apply that theory to the people that I work with. And I don't see universal wisdom in that theory. However, I've been training lately in DBT, and that is actually very dense with truth. That is something that really aligns with a lot of what I understand about the nature of God, and a lot of what I understand from the scriptures about human growth. And so, yeah, I believe that psychology can very much be just a philosophy of men. And I believe that as humans, as followers, as disciples, we can mine truth if we use discernment. And I believe there are many places where we've got something virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. There's a lot of, for example, like the United States Constitution, that is something created by men. And that's something where there was a lot of inspiration there, I believe. And there have been throughout history similar inspiration in pockets. And that's something that I do find in places in psychology. I find that very much in what I'm studying right now, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, and it is based in dialectics. It's based in the idea that there are two separate, two two seemingly opposing ideas can be true at the same time. And that's something that Joseph Smith said, that in proving contraries, truth is manifest. And scripture is full of these dialectics. One that always comes to mind for me is man is nothing, which thing I never did suppose, what Moses said. And also that the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. Both of these things are true. Being saved by work or by faith, the injunction to not judge others and that we must judge righteously, the tension between these opposing ideas is where truth is found. And so that's something that what I've been studying lately with DBT. The chief dialectic of DBT is acceptance and change. So acceptance that the client you're working with is doing the best they can right now. The emotional suffering they experience is real. And accepting reality for what it is, with change, that in order for any of us to truly enact change from where we are right now, we're going to have to work harder than we are right now to change. That, yeah, our behavior does matter. Accountability and responsibility do matter. and that we can change what is in the sphere of what we can change and accept what we actually don't have power to control. And I believe that humans often, a lot of the times, our errors come when we're trying to control things that actually are not ours to control, or when we aren't taking the steps to change out of fear, to change when it actually is in our power to make certain changes in our lives. And yeah, so the deeper I've been getting into dialectical behavioral therapy. It was created by a woman named Marsha Linehan, who is she was actually raised Catholic, and her her faith is actually pretty instrumental in her creating this modality of therapy. But it holds tension between things that feel like opposites, like having compassion for someone and also recognizing that that person, in order to live a life that's worth living, will need to take responsibility for their own life. Both of those things can be true. And also the humility of similar to that Rogerian therapy, the humility of, as therapists, we also are not perfect, and we don't believe that we have all the answers. And so we need to rely on each other to know how to best serve clients and how to best relieve suffering. So, in summary, discernment is not wholesale acceptance. It's not psychology. The entire field of psychology is we're just gonna take all of it. But it also means that truth can be found, and if truth can be found, then why not find it? Why not use it? Why not be able? Why not incorporate what is useful into our lives, what we can take from psychology to help us be treat one another with more decency, with more kindness, to be able to be more compassionate to ourselves, especially when our lack of self-compassion is getting in the way with us living the lives lives that are meaningful to us, lives that matter. So, in conclusion, yeah, it may sometimes simply be a philosophy of men, but it can also contain genuine wisdom, offer guidance, and bless lives. I loved Bill and Ted when I was a kid. I think a lot of you here may be not, I don't know if you're familiar with Bill and Ted, but um, the motto of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is be excellent to each other. And that's actually what the best of psychology teaches us. And that's what the gospel teaches as well. I have felt very grateful to uh, have been led to a career where I get to, in a small way, relieve suffering, and to be able to, I know that we all have to work by the sweat of our brow, and the fact that I get to do that, and that it is meaningful work. I'm very grateful for that. And thank you for letting me share all of that. And I look forward to everyone's questions after Peter is finished with his presentation.
Hey, thank you, Wendy. Thank you. All right. We'll hear from Peter.
Okay. Yes, I'll share my screen. Would like to record your computers? Yeah. It's giving me all kinds of questions now.
Wendy may need to stop sharing her screen as well.
Okay, hold on. Oh, yeah. There we go.
There.
Okay.
Is he still here?
I don't know. I don't see him at all. Hold
Yeah.
on.
Do you
Hold
think he
on. Let me.
disappeared? He needs to log back in.
Oh,
There
there
While
he
we're
he
is.
waiting
is.
for my, I do appreciate you. I am a fan of Rogers, by the way. Yeah, I do like his
Oh,
philosophy,
that's cool.
psychology.
Yeah, I love Carl
Yeah,
Rogers.
at the end, when we do the questioning part, I'll ask you some questions about his the Rogerian approach. I'm a big fan.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Wens. Okay, so I am going to just share very briefly some thoughts that I cobbled together that are kind of the way I have been framing this conflict between psychological teaching, therapeutic modalities, and the gospel principles, the teachings that we are trying to explore and embrace. And so, can you guys see my screen or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay. How about now?
Yes, we can now see it.
Okay, awesome. So I did use Claude to make this. I hope no one hates me for using AI, but the ideas are all mine. So
Yeah.
my son just raised
AI
his
is
hand.
the greatest secretary you can have.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is actually a discussion that's been happening, I think, movement-wide. It's happened in our fellowship. And I was thinking about this, and I stumbled across that classic quote of Joseph Smith's, if you're going to ascend a ladder, begin with the first step, blah, blah, blah. And it struck me that knowledge or truth is the one side of the ladder, and perhaps wisdom is the other side of the ladder. You can't have rungs without the two sides of the ladder, correct? And so, or no rung will hold, they'll just kind of collapse. And so, in order for us to make our ascent, we need the two rails, But the idea is that ultimately, we're trying to make the ascent back to the presence of God. And what I perceive happening, and I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about knowledge is very concrete, direct, and it tells us exactly what our destination is. It tells us, hey, you need to be like Jesus. You need to be compassionate, charitable, forgiving, meek, repentant, whatever the instruction might be. The how to do that is not explicit usually in scripture. There's stories told, but the actual how is something that we learn by trial and errors quite significantly. Every one of us on this call can probably point to what Paul would call his thorn in the flesh. Maybe you have a thorn in your flesh. Maybe you have patterns you've recognized, like, why do I do what I do when I know what I know, And so what I feel like some of these tools that are being provided to us through psychology are they're teaching us the how. They're teaching us how to be temperate, how to be unified. So, for example, I've been married to Wendy for 25, now coming up on 26 years, and we're having a conversation in the bathroom. I was brushing my teeth, she's doing her makeup. This is like last week sometime. And we're just, we're always talking about things. And she said to me, she said, yeah, when we came into the movement, you changed a little bit after your rebaptism, but when you really started to significantly change was when you started to embrace the things that Stephanie was teaching. And immediately I was a little butthurt. Like I was like, dang. Like, so the subtext of what she's saying is like, for the first 15 years of our marriage, you were kind of an asshole. And now you're so much better. And I mean, it was not what she was saying, but like my shame response came up. And so I said that to her in the bathroom. I said, hey, I have this shame response to what you said, but I'm not actually ashamed. I reframed it. I said, I'm just so grateful that I can be better now than I was. Now, I'm by far from perfect as a husband, but just in that instant, in that moment, we're talking about it, and just like I had this experience of applying things that I've learned from Stephanie's podcast, this idea of reframing a shame response, and just having this deep gratitude, not just for the change I have experienced, but just the teachings in general, that you don't have to have. I mean, when Satan is in the garden and, like the classic temple endowment, the first thing he does when Adam and Eve are standing in there, he's like, oh, see, you got to take these fig leaves, covered your nakedness, you got to hide in shame. And I think what we're being taught is no, we don't have to hide in shame. We can actually dismantle shame, and wisdom teaches us how to do that. So mankind does need to listen to wisdom. And I think some of these teachings that Stephanie's been parsing out help us do that. So, like I said, knowledge is who God is, who we are, what does God require of us, what we need to do to align ourselves with the will of heaven, why we love our enemies, and what is ultimately our destination. And wisdom is the skillful implementation of these true principles, and it's the how, you know. And I know wisdom. I love this question that like what must happen inside of me so that I can actually live the way God has revealed. Okay, that's what a good therapist asks. Those are the like, to use the Rogerian model, you're asking discovering questions so that the client can tap into that part of them that has the answers already, you know. You might call that the record of heaven, but I think a skillful therapist can help people touch that part of themselves. I talked about this, if we're commanded to renew our minds, maybe we have to identify distorted thought patterns, test them against truth, and establish healthier patterns. The scriptures don't delineate how to do that. But what I've observed Stephanie doing is like a master weaver going into the discipline of therapy, of psychology, and teasing out the true threads, the threads that are going to be required for our tapestry. Okay, the loom is there. That Denver has done a masterful job of providing the loom, of providing the structure, of providing the teachings. And now Stephanie is pulling on all these threads from all these disciplines and very wisely discerning. If you listen to her podcast from start to finish, you watch this arc of truth being plucked from different modalities, different books that she's read. And if you go actually and read those books, there's garbage in them too. And she's pulling out the truth and handing that to us on a silver platter. So I guess one question I've asked myself is, are there things she's teaching that I'm resistant to? And why am I resistant to them? Is there something that I don't want to face? And maybe as a movement, we can ask that question. Are there things we don't want to face about ourselves? So, you don't want a ladder where there's knowledge without wisdom, because you may know perfectly that you need to forgive, but no ability to, because you can't work through your trauma. And then, you take the other side of the ladder. If you've got wisdom without knowledge, you might have all these amazing skills, and you've increased your agency so that you're not just acting, so you're not just being acted upon, you're free to act. But to what purpose? If you don't have knowledge, to what end do you apply these skills? So the way I view what Stephanie is doing in embracing these things and in encouraging us to search them out is that we're increasing our agency, we're increasing our ability to choose. And as a group of people, imagine if you have this group of people where people are more self-actualized, people do have a deep, not only reverence and appreciation for their own agency and the agency of others, but the ability to actually expand that agency because they're not being trapped by patterns that they, picked up in childhood. So scriptures give us the ideal, and wisdom helps us develop the capacity to live it. And then I think there's two ways for us to fail, where we go all in on psychology and just embrace a lot of the bullshit that is in that field. We could be seriously harmed by that. And I think maybe that is where some people are coming from. Maybe they've had a negative experience with a therapist, or they understand that some of these psychological foundations are flawed. And then the other way to fail is to reject it wholesale and to say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to cling to my scriptures and my prayers, and that's going to get me to heaven. And I think that knowledge says become like Christ, and wisdom says here is how. Because ultimately, it's not sufficient to know a lot of stuff. That was Jesus's chief complaint about the Pharisees. They understood the scriptures, they understood the details, but they weren't truly living the law. They weren't living the gospel because they hadn't cultivated the truth within them. They weren't embodying it. So that's kind of all I have to share. I did create a little graphic on ChatGPT that I can share with you guys. Let me see if I can find it here in my drive, and I'll share this if you guys are interested. It's not perfect, but it kind of put the image that popped in my mind. I put in a bunch of stuff, and it created this little diagram. So the ladder of knowledge and wisdom, and kind of separating the masculine and the feminine. And I do want to kind of make one point. When people say knowledge is masculine and wisdom is feminine, I think, yeah, that's true enough, to quote Denver. But the problem is, we think if we're men, we have knowledge, or if we're women, we have wisdom. I think it's a long haul to say that you embody knowledge or you embody wisdom. There's a lot to be done, a lot of work and effort to get there. With Wendy's work, Denver makes this curious statement. He said, you can live a pretty wretched existence and still be added upon. And as Wendy and I have talked in general about the population that she works with, it's pretty amazing to hear about folks who've done terrible things and had terrible lives, and still they're able to be added upon because she's willing to engage with them from a place of non-judgment and just help them progress, that they are able to make significant progress. And yeah, I don't think we can have one without the other, you know. Knowledge without wisdom puffeth up, you know, and wisdom without knowledge, you know, I think helps us know a lot, but end up being lost. So that's all I've got to share with respect to that. I'm very grateful for the principles that I've been taught that help me to progress. And I think they've made me a better husband, a better parent, a better disciple of Christ. And I've got a long haul. And maybe there's a select few people who don't need these things, but I think by and large we all do. And if Christ's return is imminent, if there is a second coming that's going to happen, maybe we need these principles handed to us on a silver platter like we have been, because we need to progress more rapidly than we have in the past. You know, we don't have 10, 15, 30 years to figure out how to forgive people, or how to overcome our resentments. We need to be on the accelerated path to enlightenment. And I think some of these tools were being provided through these different therapeutic modalities. So I'll shut up now. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. I think what I'll do now is I'll respond to both of your paradigms, and then with some questions to kind of lead into a dialogue here. I appreciate how you're kind of you're reframing the whole debate on the philosophies of men mingled with scriptures. Very often, what happens in religious circles is they become very fundamentalist real quickly. Not even just religious, but like scientific communities, even schools of psychology. I know there was a debate in the psychology schools with Skinner and behaviorism for the longest time, where he became really, really gung ho dogmatic about behaviorism, and Panksepp was really trying to write to him, saying, "Hey, you need to like step out of your dogma here. The whole world doesn't need to be stuck in this box of behaviorism. There's other ways that your behaviorism could be really enriched if it could have some interdisciplinary dialogue with the other fields of psychology." And so Panksepp was really trying to push for that. Um, Skinner didn't quite respond, and there's political reasons for that, which I won't get into here. But what I love here is you're dissolving the dichotomy between psychology only and scripture only. Um, and you're speaking to an issue because that happens so much in every group. We become religious totalitarianism about whatever idol, whatever way of seeing that we have. It has to become the one all be all. And so you're really dissolving that. And there's wisdom to be found when you can, well, what Wendy was talking about, dialectic, dealing with contradictions and knowing how two things can be true through the process of leaning into it, questioning it. Uh, my 2 cents on the whole debate, the philosophies. Philosophy, etymological roots for philosophy means philosophia, and Sophia is Greek for wisdom, and phila is Greek for love. So philosophy is, in its essence, love of wisdom, philosophia. So when you are philosophical, you are engaging in the love of wisdom. You're trying to know how this knowledge, these ideas can be lived. Philosophy is not a bunch of German people, German thinkers in ivory towers conceptualizing Marxism for the masses. Philosophy is more a way of life. It's a way of seeing the world and questioning that way you see the world and reframing how you see it. And a shameless plug for a discussion we had earlier in our Try the Spirits dialogues when in our study group. My very first video we did was philosophy who needs it, and what the argument I made was, if you don't know the worldview that you are governed by, if you don't know the philosophy that governs your life, you'll be susceptible to every philosophy that gets crammed down your throat by popular media, by a politician, by a religious leader. And so it's incumbent on the individual to actually know their philosophy, to become philosophical, to know for themselves. And that requires, um, that requires the next word here, psychology. Psychology, when properly defined, means psyche means soul, and ology is an account. So psychology put together means an account of the soul. When you take account for your soul, that means you understand what are the spiritual influences, the ideological thought patterns that are governing your behavior. You take that into account and you recognize what is your soul, what is not your soul, and you're having discernment. So psychology in its truest forms is to practice psychology is to take an account of your soul. And that's why I love Wendy when you talked about dialectical behavioral therapy. And you invoke the Rogerian principle. Rogers is a he was a Protestant. He was a former Protestant, kind of secularized, but his his approach to psychology was very much affording the ability of his patient or client or the other to have that sort of accounting for their own soul via Socratic kind of questioning. So I use the word Socratic. Socrates big on knowing thyself. That's the main dictum in Socratic dialogues. Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, would ask questions with his interlocutors in an attempt so that the interlocutors or others can actually come to a greater an account of their own soul or a greater self-disclosing knowledge of themselves. So when you engage in dialectical behavioral therapy or the principles of Rogerian self-disclosure, what you are doing for the other is asking questions that help them know themselves. So you're very much bearing one another's burdens so that they can be light. You are discussing the welfare of your soul, as Moroni says in scripture. And it's not, so that's where I kind of want to pivot this. Maybe I'll pivot this into the question back to you, Wendy. Rogerian self-disclosure through dialogue. You come to a greater knowledge via dialogue, via actually listening to someone who is presenting you with problems in the therapeutic realm, and you're listening to them, and you're learning how you're asking questions in a way that will help them come to the knowledge themselves. Because as a therapist, you don't want to rob them of the wisdom of their own self-discovery. From my understanding, Wendy, you can correct me, but a lot of Rogerian principles is you don't want to be a therapist who just blabs all your knowledge to them. You want the patient to connect the dots themselves. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Instead of the therapist being the authority, the therapist is more someone who is partnering with the client, and the client actually, somewhere in themselves, they know what they need to do, who they need to
Yeah.
be. All of that.
What you're what you're providing then for your patient is you're like a mirror to them, a reflection to help them kind of
Yeah.
think through their own psyche, to help them give an account. Kind of similar of what Eve is to Adam. She's the Ezekiel. That's a friendly adversary or a reflective image in a way that you are affording that gift to them so that they can know themselves, right?
Yeah, yeah, even to the degree that you were talking about Socratic questioning. So I think a lot
Hmm.
of Rotarian therapists do use Socratic questioning. If you watch Carl Rogers, he didn't even use questioning. Like he was
Mm.
like very much an artist of a therapist, but I don't think I could replicate his style. I have tried, but he just reflected. He just reflected back what he was hearing from someone until like the person gets to a point where they have some sort of um they call it a corrective emotional experience, but some sort of breakthrough, people
Yeah,
will
like a,
call
like
it.
an insight,
Yeah,
or what said earlier. He called it a reframing when he was talking about shame, reframing shame. It's when you're able to listen, you're able to help them reframe.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So I'll bring that up because that's kind of something we've been trying to really practice in even in our formal scripture studies. We do something called dialogos where we intentionally like try and really listen to the other perspective. Because in the act of listening, what that does for the person that's being listened to, and then they receive feedback, is it gets them out of their own ego for a second. And so they're able to view their own life from another perspective, or they're constantly viewing themselves from a rigid framework. And because there's someone else that they can trust, that they will listen to them, it allows the individual to reframe their whole perceptions, and that affords the aha, that affords the healing or the um the healing, the cathexis.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I
And
I
I
bring
love
this up
that.
because I know, yeah, I know because a lot of what happens, I think we live in a very consumeristic culture. We're very consumeristic about our religion. And even when it comes to podcasts and everything, we consume so much information. And I think what often happens when we listen to Stephanie Stuffer's podcast is we try and really apply it individually. Just it's just me in isolation. And I think there's danger in trying to apply all these psychological principles and all this wisdom in isolation because I don't think it works. I actually think you need another person. And I think that's what fellowships are supposed to be. If we're properly practicing fellowships, is we ought to be affording one another deeper self-knowledge every single time we gather together because we are discussing the welfare of our souls. We are creating a sort of sacred and trusted space where we can actually account for one another's souls in that space. And so I wanted to kind of pitch this question back to you. Is there have you thought about this? Is there ways that you can actually apply these psychological principles beyond just your individual your individual journey of self-improvement, but actually learn how to implement them communally with your brothers and sisters in covenant Christianity?
That is a really good question. And I think
Mhm,
like yes, like that's I think that's the only way to
mhm,
really apply them because I mean, yeah, if we're just we don't realize how much we need to learn, like, or even how, I don't know, I can tell myself I'm the most patient person in the world. I can believe that about myself until I have a kid who's whatever, like screaming for hours, and then I learn where my limit is, right? Like, so I mean, it is communal. All of these things are communal. I mean, like therapy largely is about relationships, because
mhm,
relationships are where all of our joy and also most of our suffering is too, are in our
mhm,
relationships. So yeah, I do think that, yeah, applying them just individually, I mean, therapy often works on an individual level where it's a therapist with one client. I see my clients in group and individual therapy, and group therapy is very, very useful because that is a place where you've got a bunch of people in a group that are like giving you this very active feedback. There's conflict. There's a lot to work through. That if someone was just meeting with me alone, sometimes all on my own, the way that I currently do therapy, I rely on group, because if I were just meeting with someone on their own, I don't know that I would have the information to be able to challenge them in the way that the group challenges them, because being in a group is challenging, and that's okay. Like that's how we learn.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would we yeah, like growing into, I agree with you, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that
Well,
growing
I'll ask
individually sometimes, yeah, keep going.
I'll ask one counter question, and I'll let Peter answer address this question to this point about the whole group therapy and fellowships. Um, this is the only way to do it, as you said, like this idea of taking account of one another's souls, actually getting in the trenches one with another. And that requires tools of psychology, tools of messy organizing your thoughts. And it's for some of us who like to study, a lot of Hugh Nibley and the clean, pristine image of the gospel of Jesus Christ and his esoteric image. Dealing with the messiness of life can be tedious and boring. It's like, oh my gosh, I want to contemplate the perfect forms, right? But there's a necessity there to actually get in the trenches one with another and deal with the problems, and that requires yeah, that would require wisdom and tools of knowing, or tools of psychology, and what philosophy has to offer. I want to ask a controversial point here. This is kind of going to broader culture at large. There's something in some psychology circles called the meaning crisis, where especially a lot of young men and women in our generation, because we've kind of been we're losing trust in our institutions. We're eroding the bonds that keep us in trusted circles one with another. And because of that, we are experiencing a huge increase in depression and anxiety and all these mental health issues, because we don't actually we're not properly nested in a proper social sphere. And so because of that, there's been an uptick for the need of therapists and whatnot. And what the therapist is now offering is, I think, tell me what you think about this, Wendy. What the therapists now, and I'm not talking about like the crazy psychosis and abnormal psych that you see in prisons and in the extremes, but more generally, the populace at large. What the therapist is offering, the therapist through their skill set is offering something that ought to be offered or ought to be cultivated within a pre-existing small group community. It's something that the church should be offering, but they're not, because we've been losing our religion, we've been losing our institutions, and so we're not having those relationships built, and so we're having to actually call up a therapist because we're not able to do it in a small group. Um, what do you think of that? Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. I mean, I do think
Could,
I worry about the whole like going no contact, this idea that,
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, that, but yeah, for maybe for decades, for who knows how long, I'm encountering this idea right now, exactly as you expressed it, but that we haven't been properly nested in communities. And that's true. That's very true. And in some ways, it feels like we're in some circles moving even more that way. This idea that, hey, if you have a relationship that you are experiencing some sort of pain in, you should just cut off that relationship. Like there's a lot of that type of dialogue these days. Um, and yeah, I don't think that that is the right direction. I mean, we are pack animals. Humans need to be with humans,
yeah,
and
social
a lot of
creatures.
times, yeah, Western culture is very much has been moving toward, yeah, all you need is your independence and following your own, whatever you want to do with your own life, and don't just don't infringe on someone else's rights and you're good. But we don't have that same sense of community that maybe our ancestors had. And I do think that we suffer for it. And I do think that, yeah, some people call up a therapist because what they really need is a friend, or what they really need is someone in their lives to connect with, get support from, and provide support for, right?
Yeah, because big argument Jordan Peterson keeps making, and I follow him rather closely. I'm a student of Jordan Peterson. Is that your individual soul is not? It's wrong to treat the individual as just an individual when it comes to mental health. You have to know that they are nested in many hierarchies of relationships, and you have to be able to take that into account, and to not just treat the individual, but help the individual properly uh, be in those communities.
Yeah,
I know Peter had his hand up. I'd like to hear from Peter, and then we'll hear from Kimberly.
Sure. So this is actually a question for Wendy, kind of putting on my listener hat, and maybe I'll say something too. But one of the biggest indicators of a positive outcome for the client is what they call the therapeutic alliance with the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So that therapeutic alliance, independent of modality, the nature of the trauma, there's like a whole bunch of things. The strongest predictor of a good outcome is the therapeutic alliance, that relationship. And I guess my question is, I don't think we all need to be each other's therapists, but there is something about that therapeutic alliance that has to do with, a bond that is being created, a trust that is developed. If we were in small communities, let's call them fellowships, where we had that type of alliance with people outside of our families. Let's look at my fellowship, for example. I'm in a happy marriage with awesome kids. We have our ups and downs. If I'm having a rough time, Wendy's my first line of defense. I'm like, hey, hon, what do you think? Because we have a strong therapeutic alliance. We have a strong bond built over 25 plus years. I've got other people in my fellowship, Tyler, Nelson, all these people around me who I trust implicitly because of years of experience, interactions with them. If Wendy and I were having a hard time, I may go to one of them and say, hey guys, I'm really having a hard time doing X. Is that appropriate? Is that inappropriate? Wendy and I are struggling here. How have you experienced that? Is that a wrong approach? Or is that something that communities provided historically that is now being outsourced to the therapeutic community? What do you think, love?
Yeah, no, I agree. I love that. Yeah. And the therapeutic alliance is the strongest predictor of positive outcomes in therapy, no matter what modality you use. Even like, though we were talking about, some modalities maybe are more dense with truth, and others, at least from my perspective, are less dense with truth, maybe have more error in them. And when it comes down to it, yeah, it's the therapeutic alliance that makes the main difference in therapy. But this idea that you feel that your therapist cares for you, you feel you can trust your therapist, and you feel like you are working toward the goals that you want to be working toward. That's mainly what that therapeutic alliance is. So yeah, that's absolutely something we can have with the people, our partners in life, our close friends, the people that really know us. Like, those are the people we should feel like, oh yeah, this person cares for me and I care for them, and I feel like I can trust them, and and I hope they trust me, and we're working together towards goals that we share. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree.
So, can I ask a follow-up question to that statement that Wendy just made? Um, Wendy, then from your clinical experience, and then we'll go out to Peter and then go to Kimberly here. What is the stumbling block, or what destroys the therapeutic alliance? Because I think if we can understand what destroys the therapeutic alliance in a clinical setting, perhaps we can understand what destroys the bonds of fellowship or the bonds of Christian love within our fellowship.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So typically it's called rupture, and there's actually really interesting research on rupture, because a rupture is this idea that, okay, I'm going along with my therapist, everything's going well, and then my therapist says something that actually like really hurts, or I feel really misunderstood, or really someone is like, there's just a bump in the road. Like that happens with human to human, right? And when you have that rupture, there's actually research that shows, and I love this research, that therapeutic alliances where you've had a rupture and then a repair to that rupture are actually stronger than therapeutic alliances where there was no rupture in the first place. So, yeah. So, what destroys it is when just through the course of life, yeah, we hurt each other. That's what people do sometimes. We don't, often unintentionally. Um, we all have different perspectives and came from different families. And if we then do not go on to do the hard work to repair that relationship, that's actually what destroys it. Instead of doing the work to repair, we just, you know what, it didn't work out, I'm just gonna whatever avoid that person. Things are just, you just, drift off, or just have a very strained relationship. That would be what would destroy it, instead of working on the repair to say, hey, yeah, I think I really hurt your feelings the other day, or I think I said something that maybe meant something to you, and maybe you felt misunderstood. Can we talk about this? And actually talking through that and being pretty direct about what may have gone wrong, until, again, listening, fully understanding what it was that the other person experienced that caused this rupture. Once I can repeat it back to them, then we know what we're dealing with and we can work on a repair, because we both understand what rupture happened. And so we can repair it at that point.
So yeah, so for the fellowship realm, we need to do a lot more of repairing or reconciling one with another.
Yeah.
If your brother has anything against thee, go thy way into thy brother, and first be reconciled to thy brother, and then come to me with full purpose of heart, and I'll receive you. So if we're going to maintain those bonds, okay.
I would
Yeah.
almost argue what Wendy was describing there in repairing the rupture sounds a lot like what the scriptures call reasoning together. You know what I mean? This idea of let's reason together. Let me truly understand you, not coming from a place of defensiveness or ego, but because I deeply care for you as a person. And so the best model, I think, for framing this maybe is marriage. So, for example, I've made a covenant with God. We call it the covenant. September 2017 was kind of a line in the sand for a lot of us. We took the covenant. So I'm now bonded to God and these people. And if one of my brothers or sisters and I have a rupture, I have a covenant based, to use the theology side of things, responsibility to repair that rupture. And I now have tools from these therapeutic modalities to help heal that rupture so that we can go forward in a stronger relationship and build those bonds of Christian love. That, I don't know, that I would argue that is part of what we're trying to accomplish here.
And that's going to require the dialectic. So dialectic is the oppositions, the two opposing viewpoints colliding together. When we choose not to actually butt heads, but instead, you offended me, I'm just going to go off and do my own thing now and let you be.
Well,
That's very dangerous for the community, because you don't do the dialectic required.
Or worse yet, don't acknowledge it. Just be nice about it. Like being nice is almost like it's to borrow a word from pop psychology, toxic, because it's no one then knows there was a rupture in the first place. You literally may have hurt someone. I mean, someone may be grieving. Let's use grief as an example. They're grieving and you offer them a platitude and they want to smack you because you've said, oh, you know what, you'll get over it, or some stupid platitude, or, you know, and they were deeply hurt. For them to just treat you nicely in the future, that does more harm than good. They've got to be upfront with you. And we as a people have to have the capacity to bear with one another during the rocky parts, like you would in a marriage. When your spouse comes unglued because of whatever, you've got to just be able to be like, okay, let's explore this together, you know? Not that Wendy ever comes unglued or I ever come unglued. I mean, you know.
No, perfect, excellent advice. Let's pivot this. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Wendy. Let's pivot this to the dialogue has been occurring now between the three of us. Let's pivot this to Kimberly and Adam. We'll hear from Kimberly first with her questions, and then we'll lead into Adam's with his questions.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so wow, it's hard to even know where to begin because this is just so good and edifying, and I'm grateful. And I just driving by too loud for the recording or anything. Okay. Um with the therapy thing itself, like being a therapist. Um I wonder, because there's scriptures about like not counseling and like seeking counsel from unbelievers. And so for me personally, I don't want to meet with a therapist that does not deeply like believe in Jesus Christ. Like I don't, and I know that therapists are trained to not bring their bias into it, but I just feel like inherently the questions that will come to their mind, the guidance that they'll seek from in which to help guide the therapeutic session, um, I feel like, yeah. And so with therapy itself, I feel like, and I love that Peter brought up the therapeutic alliance and such. To me, something I ponder if it's a true, good, safe, righteous principle. And I want to give the disclaimer too that Wendy, I'm sure like by the fruits you shall know them. So I'm sure there's been such good fruit with people's lives that you have helped so much in therapy. So what I'm about to say is coming from a place of me being hurt in therapy is kind of fueling this question, this perspective. But in my mind, people are taking a stranger whom they don't know that is specifically remaining removed emotionally and withholding personal information like appropriate, it's appropriate to do that. And you're being very, and like the client is being very emotionally intimate, very emotionally vulnerable. Like to me, the power dynamic, the intimacy dynamic, like it is in my experience built uh to be very dangerous if the therapists are not very good at their job. And because they're human, even if they are good, there's those ruptures, right? And then how do clients is I've never had a therapist. Now, as you were talking, I was like, man, it'd be so helpful if a therapist was like, hey, let me explain to you ruptures. Like, likely I'm going to say things that are going to hurt you. And I want to create a way where you feel safe telling me, like, so I guess I just wanted to ask, like, do you believe, or like, what is your perspective on the emotional safety of creating therapeutic alliances in a setting that is professional, one-sided, stranger on purpose? Does that question making sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah. And that is something that, like, I often find myself having conversations with clients when they are, I mean, because I work with what's called a mandated population, like they basically have to come to therapy if they want to parole from prison. And so that makes it especially challenging because they didn't seek out therapy. And often they very much want to be my friend. And maybe in a totally different setting, I would want to be their friend. And it can be weird for clients. Like I get really explicit about it where I just say, yeah, this is a really weird relationship because I know all of these things about you, and you don't get to know the same things about me. Like, I don't share all of this stuff, and I am just a person who has my own problems and all of that, my own stuff to work on. And yeah, I try to be explicit about that, but yeah, so I guess I will say, so therapists operate under a code of ethics, and I love ethics. And I also think that we are not perfect at ethics. So yes, I will tell you, ethically, a therapist should be creating an emotionally safe space for you, in which, yeah, if you feel like that therapist does not have your needs or interests truly at heart, that you can bring that up and you can work through that. And also ethically, yeah, you had said it before, but yeah, your therapist is not supposed to bring their values into the relationship and the work that you do. They are supposed to support you in your values. And they need to check their own values at the door if they have different values than the ones that you have. And that being said, I will say that therapists, yeah, are not, they're not, they're just people. Like, they're people who went to a couple more years of school and maybe have some experience under their belt, and you're not always going to get a good one. Like, and that's sucks. I don't know. Yeah, but it's just like, I think that therapy very much can work for the people that it works for, but also, I mean, the modality I'm training in right now, DBT, we keep seeing people who come in and say, yeah, my old therapy didn't work for me. I want to try this because I've heard that this might work. So it's not uncommon to have had I guess, a rupture that wasn't repaired, because it is, again, just another human relationship. And uh, we humans are not perfect at relationships, and therapists are not perfect at relationships. And I'm sorry that that happened to you, because it sounds like you had some not great experiences. And I'm sorry about that.
Oh, thank you. Well, man, yeah, and what I guess too, to like add to what you're saying and to ask a further question is, would that the model that is necessary for therapy to work with those boundaries you were explaining, I do think that is necessary for it to be a profession. It has to be the time that you have. But do you believe that the way it is built is fallen and unideal?
Hmm. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I actually found a lot of value in boundaries. And that being said, I work with a criminal population. That's something, though, that I have found as a therapist. There are these boundaries, and that allows me, from my experience, to actually have more room to work with people who otherwise I don't know if I would have the bandwidth for. And I'm talking about, like, I work with people with all sorts of personality disorders, and all of the diagnoses in the world, where they've just had a lot of them have had some pretty rough lives and have learned to cope in some ways that are pretty, what we call, maladaptive. And so, yeah, boundaries on my end help me to be present. Like, okay, I can be present with this person for an hour. And yet, if this person was, if we were just friends and we were just hanging out all the time, it might be difficult. And that being said, yeah, and maybe you bring up a really good idea, that as fellowships, like Peter said, it's potentially similar, if we behave in a way similar to the therapeutic alliance. Like, maybe that is a potentially better model than the therapist model. I don't know. I'm just like, throwing it out there. And I get how the therapy model works for therapists in the world that we currently live in, to be able to have the space and the bandwidth to support people in a way that they might not have received, might not be receiving support from other people. And I don't know if I'm curious how boundaries apply in a fellowship environment, in a Zion environment. I do still think that boundaries are something that boundaries are for me. They're not for the other person. When I have to set a boundary, it is for me recognizing that I have a weakness and can't actually will not actually perform at my best if I don't set this boundary. They don't have something to do with the other person or making some sort of judgment. Or that's how I conceptualize boundaries within the framework of the gospel. It's acknowledging, hey, you know what? I actually have a weakness here. I have a place where I need to grow. And I know that if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm eventually going to feel some resentment. So I'm setting a boundary so I can be the best, whatever, partner, best therapist, best whatever to someone that I can be. And I don't know if I went off on too much of a tangent for you right now.
That's really good. I want to add to that, because I kind of what I was seeing between you and Kimberly, what you're talking about here, in regards to the therapeutic relationship, there is a managing and applying obviously all this to fellowships. There is obviously a managing of our expectation when it comes to other covenant Christians. I mean, I think often we enter into a therapeutic relationship thinking that our therapist is so much more intellectually superior than us, and it just hasn't made in life. And then we have this false expectation that we project on them, and then they slip up and say one thing that completely offends us. I remember having this kind of paradigm when I went on an LDS mission, thinking that I grew up thinking that Mormon missionaries are like superheroes. And then when I got into the mission field, I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are hooligans. They're anything but super heroic. They are actually pretty immature and rambunctious. And so I had to reframe and manage my expectations. But I think the danger, though, when it comes to the boundary language, is having too much boundaries obviously will lead to what we talked about earlier with Peter. You are going to now just completely snuff them out of your life and completely ignore the problems, because you're putting up so many boundaries that you're not even going to go into that mess. I think what dictates boundaries in regards to fellowships is, you might say, where you're nested in your relationships with them. So I obviously with like marriage, everything is transparent in a marriage. There are very few boundaries in a marriage. Everything has to be. And then you're going to need discernment on how close of a fellowship you have with your fellow covenant Christian. I mean, think about the covenant that we committed to in 2017. What boundaries are dictated in there? And I think that will determine how close or how recluse you're going to be with your fellow Christians in that regard. I think there's some wisdom there. Kind of my 2 cents on that topic, Wendy. I don't know if that crosses any lines, but that's kind of how I view how boundaries need to be established in regards to fellowship relationships.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Let's
I know.
no, go ahead, Kimberly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know Adam wanted to say something. I want to apologize too that when you were responding to me, my dog started barking at the neighbor. So, but I really appreciate what you shared. And yeah, I think like for time's sake, I want to switch to Adam, but I just want to acknowledge I'm so grateful that we're doing this, and I'd be interested in a part 2 on this topic, because I think mental health is ravaging our lives right now, and I think that we need all hands on deck in a way that is for the celestial kingdom, and so yeah, for time's sake, I'll pass on, but just thank you guys, and there's a lot more I want to explore on this for sure.
Yeah, me too. I think hands on deck. We are losing our next generation if we don't do something. So yeah, Adam, go for it.
Yeah, It's been interesting kind of taking in everything that's being said. Um, I have a lot of disconnected thoughts. I guess if a question emerges, then I will ask it. But I kind of wanted to distill some of the information being shared. Um, I think that in general, the concepts are actually not necessarily the problem. I think it's and I mean the concepts of what we're talking about, the psychology and therapy, and how it relates to wisdom and how that altogether relates to knowledge and the application and the how we do it. Um, I don't take any issue with that. I think I take issue with the practice of uh, therapy in our culture in a similar way to, I think, the questions that you were addressing, Kimberly. And the reason being is this: I think if we are to fellowship together, um, that necessarily means that we're creating relationships with each other. And that means that I am getting to know you on more than just a surface level. I'm getting to know you, in and out. I know what gives you joy and what gives you deep sorrow and what things you struggle with individually and personally, and what things are a burden to you and which things are not a burden to you, but maybe a burden to others. And ultimately, if we're all participating in dialogues and good company and having, discussing the welfare of our souls while we gather together with the sacrament and with certain events and commemorations, and we maybe make the effort to gather because we want to, not necessarily because we feel like we have to, because it's a religious observance. I think naturally what happens is we act as each other's therapists in a sense that we're able to talk through our issues and our struggles. And the deeper that you get to know the people within your circle, um, I think the greater help that they are to you rather than some random individual who may not be part of a fellowship, may not even be a Christian, and may have their own way of life and their own complete circle of the people that they deal with, whether it's like a clinical practice uh, or not. Um, I think the the warning that I feel like is prominent is that if we disassociate ourselves and seek out therapy that is not the people around us that we actually commingle with and that are in our sphere of relationships, I think um, being uh, we risk being in a position where we're actually not practicing like we have been kind of talking about. Uh, we're not practicing the things that we're learning in a deep sense because we're engaging instead with someone on the outside rather than the people on the inside. And although we can learn things on the outside and then try to put them into practice on the inside, that is still not necessarily talking through things as you would one-on-one with the person on the outside, unless you are actually doing that with the people on the inside. Um, my point is that I think if we continue to separate and we go in that direction with our generation, which it definitely is happening, then um, we risk too much like individuality, not enough connection and community, and um, and then we risk, for me, just speaking from experience, we risk being misunderstood. And therefore, it's actually harder to connect with people inside your community because if you haven't talked about your issues with those people, then you're actually hiding stuff. You're hiding parts of you that ought to have light shed on so that you can actually uplift each other and be uplifted. And so Christ can be amongst you. And so that's kind of that's kind of like my 2 cents on that. I don't think it's necessarily like a bad thing to seek out therapy, but my suggestion would be absolutely, if you are a Christian and if you are not just a believing Christian, but you actually profess and you actually do one and the same with Christ, and I guess in our circle as covenant Christians, if that's what you truly do and who you truly are, then yeah, seek out a therapist if you feel like you need to within that circle so that you can actually relate to each other on at a fellowship level too, and not keep the business side of it separate. Because I think if you keep the business side of it separate, you risk separating the parts of you that actually need to be integrated with everyone else. You need to keep each other whole. You need to round out and sharpen each other's edges, not remove the people that are the problem, just because they're not willing to talk about their issues with the people immediately in your fellowship, right? Because that disconnects, that separates, that keeps us, within our own spheres. So that's my perspective on that. And so I would suggest, yeah, therapists that are Christ-centered and that actually teach, whether or not it's literally Christ's words or, words of, let's see, our modern culture, like Stephanie has been doing, but just uh, in a more kind of common tongue, maybe less religious. Uh, there's a word that I'm thinking of that I can't remember, but
Jargon.
jargon. Yes. I think it's fine if you're using less religious jargon, but if you at least are able to resonate with those same things, um, at a level with the therapist, I think that's the best of that kind of solution because they are trained. They do this professionally, meaning they're using their gifts, they're using their talents for that specific purpose, and they know how to hold that space for you, but they're also relating to you through Christ because they are also a believer, because they are part of your fellowship now. You are
Yeah.
fellowshipping with that person. So that's kind of
They have
that's
something called tacit knowledge, where they have tacit knowledge is when you have the actual like tacit knowledge is wisdom, pretty much. You have the know-how to your particular situation in your life because you're kind of governed by the same narrative as your therapist or your friend that you are working through this issue with,
yeah.
and they'll hear you out. They'll actually be able to give you feedback in a way that's properly calibrated to the situation that you will find yourself in as a covenant Christian. So,
Yeah. Which I think
yeah,
is again part of the reason for the fellowship system is we're meant to be practicing and doing these
yeah.
things together so that we can figure this stuff
No,
out
and
on
the
the
fact
on
we
the
have
ground
the
level.
fact that we might need therapists may be a symptom of a problem that we're not addressing in house.
Yeah.
So, I know Peter
And
has his hand up. I think
Yeah.
he wants to
Wanna-
respond to your comments.
yeah, I'd love
But
to comment on both what Adam and Kimberly have said to some degree, and then Wendy can correct me because I'm mostly wrong. The 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 power dynamic between the therapist and the client is an issue. And it's something that needs to be addressed both explicitly, and it needs to be something that the client is aware of. And in a community of equals, I see that being eliminated.
Mhm.
I don't, I can see someone's strengths and weaknesses, have a therapeutic alliance of some variety with them, and they can speak truth into my life, and I can speak truth into their life, and we can support each other. So I do think that the fellowship to some degree can solve some of this. As to the quality of therapists, I think they follow a Pareto distribution. It's an 80-20 rule. 20% of therapists out there are amazing and 80% suck. Like that's just the bottom line. It really is like I know a lot of therapists because we have friends that are therapists and friends of friends that are therapists. And some of them I would just never go to for therapy. I just wouldn't. And I do like the idea of going to a therapist whose values align with mine because I think the ability to check your biases at the door is a learned skill. And I think lots of folks just haven't learned it. It's very difficult. And I went to a therapist for a long time, well, not like regularly, but on and off as things would come up. And he was a strong LDS guy, believes in Jesus and everything, but I mentioned something once about and he's like, I could tell he was like, well, maybe if you go back to church, it's not what he said, but it was like the subtext of what he was saying. And I was like, yeah, sorry. And basically at that point, what I should have said was, hey, Sean, what I hear you saying is you want me to go back to church. That sounds like your bias creeping into our therapy session. But I didn't quite have the tools, like whenever this was a number of years ago, to say it that way. Now I probably would have and kept that therapeutic relationship going. I just never did. I was like, this guy's not for me, tanking this, whatever. But I do see one problem. So here's a dialectic. The therapist has certain responsibilities and the ethics that Wendy mentioned. One of them is confidentiality. And so in a fellowship community, you want a certain degree of transparency. And this is actually a big issue in religious communities where someone goes to their bishop instead of a therapist, their priest instead of a therapist, says, hey, this thing happened, I need help, and it's kept in the community when it probably should have gone outside the community for help, meaning law enforcement or something like that.
For extreme cases.
Extreme cases, yeah. So so I think that we need to be open to the idea. Like, I love the concept of equality and us all leaning on each other and helping each other cope with our struggles and our grief. But sometimes some folks are just super dysfunctional and they need an outside expert in a specific modality or domain. And we as a community should support that without shaming them. We should be like my vision, and this is purely my vision of a covenant Christian community, is both and. Like, I will be your friend, I will be your supporter, I will champion you, I will help you, I will hold you accountable, you do the same for me. And when we don't have the capacity to, we will get you help somewhere else. We will get you outside help. And no matter what that means, and we're going to get you that help, or you're going to get me that help. So it can be both, and it doesn't have to be exclusive. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
And that way we practice healthy boundaries as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Adam. Let's hear from Parker. He's got his hand up. I have a feeling he's going to offer an interesting perspective here to all of this.
It's interesting that you mentioned that and when you mentioned if you were talking, the context you talked about was typically in extreme cases where it should be going out of house. But you talk about how people will go to the bishop or the priest instead of maybe law enforcement. And I know Khaden and I have discussed a while back about maybe therapy in the context of non serious issues that need to be dealt with law enforcement. Is our secularized version of the Sacrament of Confession that we've lost through the Reformation and the Enlightenment, the Protestant Reformation. Because
can you explain what the Sacrament of Confession is for us?
So, the Sacrament of Confession is. I'll go through the Orthodox perspective because I like it better, and I think it's more aligned with covenant Christianity. And before you partake of the Eucharist, you go to your priest, your spiritual father, and in the Orthodox tradition, you both are standing and both are facing toward the cross, and you basically walk through you're basically thinking you better. Thinking you better. Your things that are disconnecting you from God, and the priest is there to give you spiritual advice. what you need to do, and at the end of it, he's wearing a shawl. He places his shawl over you and prays over you, and then keep it and you go home and you put back to the device.
Can I contrast this real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just that image of the priest with the shawl over you, and you're both looking at the image of Christ. That's the act of confession. Contrasted to the Catholics, they have their secrecy where you're behind that little slot there, and you tell the priest, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or I've done this, and the priest is like, oh, you kind of see that popular as a movie. And then contrasted to the Mormon idea where in order to get your temple recommend, you better fess up all your wrongdoings to a bishop, and you sit in his office and he has a notepad piece of paper and it's really intimidating. Oh, bishop, I did something I shouldn't have done late last night. I don't. Anyways, it's hard. But it's not that model of confession. So for the confession, I think the role with the priests, and it's not in Orthodoxy, it's not as hierarchical and regimented as it is in the LDS Church. You have a father in the Orthodox Church, and he's your spiritual father, meaning he's your spiritual guide. He's not a father like an authoritarian figure that you have to fess up all your how you've been a bad boy this week before you can take the Eucharist. Rather, it's what the symbolism is with the Eucharist or the sacrament is you are approaching the emblem of Christ. And before you can approach Christ, you need to offer up yourself as a living sacrifice, and not just parts of yourself, but your entire self as a living sacrifice. And so the act of the confession you do with the priest is an act of cognitively gathering yourself together, taking full account of your soul, psychology, as you said, taking full account of your soul and understanding what you've missed, what parts of your soul managed to get away from you this week, what parts, that is confession. It is a pure act of gathering yourself before the altar. And the role of the priest is to help you conceptualize that, to help you make sense of that, to help you think through that. So it's very much like a therapeutic relationship in that regards. It's not an authoritarian. It's not an authoritarian figure like we associate with the bishop in the LDS Church. So I kind of wanted to clarify those contrasts, Parker.
Yeah.
Continue.
And I wonder. I think there even if we don't have a sacrament of confession, in our restoration of theology, the covenant of Christ has some interesting things in regard to that, where it goes, and if any of you will come to me, or if dark could come to me, and remember that your brother or sister hold anything against you, go your way first to your brother and sister to be reconciled with them, and then come to me with full commitment in your heart, and I'll welcome you. And the very next verse it says, accept accountability for your misconduct the instant it brought to your attention, to avoid leaving this life unrepentant and risking condemnation by God. I'm warning you, you discover no way to escape before paying fully for every sin. And while in prison under condemnation, are you able to redeem yourself? I warn you that you cannot. So in the Sermon on the Mount, which is the law of Christ, we have the idea that before you can actually come to Christ fully, you need to reconcile yourself. Well, you have to take accountability for your soul and responsibility, and especially the way your relationship with other people. So maybe there is a aspect we need to be doing with our fellowship is when we speak to each other about the welfare of our soul, there's a way to maybe have our misconduct brought up to our attention, and then taking that time to reconciling ourselves with the people that we have offended. What are your thoughts on that?
Wendy?
I have some
Okay.
thoughts.
Oh, sorry. What did you say, Adam?
I just had like a quick thought. I would think Yes, Parker, and maybe if things are brought up, if your misconduct is made known to you, even in a group setting, I would still think go to those individuals and work that out then before you then come back and worship together. Because I think when we're in fellowships, we are worshiping together and we are maybe approaching the altar in that sense. So we must go our way with our brother or sister first. But yeah, I think that's it's a good
That's
connection.
why the sacrament of confession always precedes the Eucharist. It has to come before in
Yeah.
procession of rituals.
So I have a bit of a history with Catholicism, but an absolute love of Orthodoxy. And so I love the Orthodox approach to confession, but I love that the Catholics actually renamed confession the Sacrament of Reconciliation, because I think it's a more substantive, broader, it's not just about confessing your sins. Because of that trope, you go confess to the priest, he says, say 10 Hail Marys and 5 Our Fathers, and you're good to go. They now call it the Sacrament of Reconciliation, and maybe the Orthodox have done something similar or not, but I actually do like the idea of both facing the cross and seeking counsel from your spiritual director. One of the things that our fellowship practiced for an extended period prior to our participation in this fellowship is public confession of sins. And so they would actually confess their sins to one another as Scripture directs. That has now kind of gone more into the background, where it's not public in the sense of in front of everybody at a meeting, because that was pretty brutal, I think. But it's now more, hey, if someone's got something they're struggling with, they'll find someone they trust and come to them in the fellowship. So, and they may say, hey, this is something I'm struggling with. Will you hold me accountable to my goals here? And I think that's a healthier approach. And one other thing, and then I'll shut up. I took the answer to the prayer for covenant, and I went through it. You guys have heard of this concept of an examination of conscience. It's something that Christians do before they take the Eucharist. They'll go through these and I actually took the answer to the prayer for covenant and turned it into an examination of conscience, where you could go through and this is kind of a bunny trail because it's got nothing to do with therapy. But it's really useful because it forces you to kind of look at how you've been a hypocrite, like expose your blind spots, because it's a static list of questions that are rooted in Scripture that force you to face yourself, So I kind of like that idea.
Well, that is therapeutic, because part of it, when you're talking about therapy, it's both compassion and accountability. And if you're going to do some real psychotherapeutic work in dialectical behavioral therapy, CBT, and more specifically like the union stuff, but all of that is coming to a Socratic self-knowledge where you have to get over the trauma that you've incurred. You have to take account for where you went wrong in life and where you are living, where you are acting where you are not being your authentic self because you're living a lie. You have to remove those masks in the therapeutic pursuit, take account so that you can actually approach the Eucharist, the sacrament, as your authentic self and not the facade that you're putting on for other people. So I see that through line in there. We are running short on time, and I know you said you have a hard stop in 8 minutes. I wanted to pivot the time back to Wendy for her to kind of address all that has been said in the last 30, 20 minutes, and for her to kind of give some closing remarks. I'll give her the last say today. So.
No, thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, to our discussion earlier, I am just a person who went to school for a couple extra years. And yeah, I think I've really appreciated our discussion about the value of therapy, the value of the principles of therapy, whether or not you decide to formally go to a therapist. To a lot of the recent comments, I would say that Yeah, especially with, I know therapy is so much more normalized with Gen Z, and that can be wonderful that the rising generation is so much more acquainted with, hey, let me check in with myself. Let me figure out the origin of why I might be feeling so offended right now and work through that. I think that is awesome. And to the point of that Adam and Kimberly were making about, hey, but shouldn't we be going to a therapist instead? I mean, shouldn't we be going to our fellowship instead of a therapist? I would say that, like, yeah, it depends on what therapy is for. Like, there are a lot of these, what we know about what works mental health wise, maybe things that you can work on amongst your fellowship, or yeah, that you can study out and learn amongst yourselves. And then for therapy, maybe for kind of what Peter said, some of the um, bigger presenting concerns where maybe a fellowship may not be equipped to provide the support necessary to someone. And that being said, yeah, I think that is part of regarding each other with charity, is affording one another the autonomy to um, make their own decisions for their lives, while also striving to form connected, um, true friendships in the gospel. And yeah, I think, again, there comes that dialectic, that it is a balance of allowing one another the autonomy to direct their lives as they see fit, and at the same time, um, forming close bonds with one another, doing what we can to build bonds with one another, and working through all of whatever comes up. We've had so many experiences as a movement that aren't like, they've been maybe uncomfortable, but I don't see them as a bad thing, because they exposed in us, oh, okay, this is where we have to grow. This is where we currently don't see eye to eye. And I'm excited about all of the ways that we have been striving to learn from those experiences. And I appreciate that we can have both the scriptures and so many disciplines to learn from shared human experience, and that we can take the good from that, and that we can cultivate the wisdom to be able to discern what is good from all the different disciplines, including psychology and mental health support. And that was what I had to say about that, because you invited me to say the last words. I don't know if those were the most relevant
Thank you,
last
Wendy.
words.
No, that was really good. Those are some really good last words. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you for coming to our fellowship today to discuss these principles, to kind of address this debate. And thank you for your time and attention. Um, and to you as well, Mr. Peter, as well. Thank you, Peter. Both of you, you guys are a power couple there. You're a dyad there. I thank you both for your knowledge and wisdom. And I thank you, Covenant Christians, and any other Mormons who may stumble upon this recording in the future, for your time and attention. May God bless you, and I pray and hope that the principles we discussed and articulated you will find them relevant and edifying to your situation. God bless you and have a wonderful day.